Welcome to the LSI Behind the Wind podcast. My name's Sean Slatter, and for 30 years, I've dedicated my life to the science of business development. I've seen the impact of our work, which has evolved into economic development and now social impact. On this episode, I'm so excited to have Congressman Blake Moore join me. And Congressman Moore and I have known each other for many years, and he grew up in Ogden, Utah, which is where I live, and we worked together in his previous roles in different capacities, and was excited when Congressman Moore was elected to serve in the 1st District of Utah in the U.S. House of Representatives. And we talk about his first year in office and also a lot about his role on the House Armed Services Committee and IIJA and some other topics that I think have been very relevant over the last several months. So I hope you enjoy this episode with Congressman Blake Moore. Congressman Moore, I'm so grateful that you joined me this afternoon for this episode. We've been working with you even, I guess, prior to you being elected, but you've been in office now for just over a year. And as we start this, could you just talk about your background, your history, and then I'd love to start this discussion talking about your first year being in the Congress.
Feels like 10.
I know.
Yeah. So I look back, and I can look back as far as like the late 80s on when I thought that politics might be something of interest to me. My mom was a clerk for the Weber County Clerk's Office. She would, the days on election night, I would go down to the Radisson downtown, and I would be the courier taking the box of ballots from like the lobby, and I would deliver them into the place where they were doing the ballot counting and everything. And so I was always, I was a part of the process. My mom she would always volunteer and do, you remember those booths with the American flag draped around it that they were, you go in and do your voting and everything. And so I'd always just been around it to some degree. And then, throughout life, I think back to my senior year of high school, I was honored to win this award. It was just the most incredible experience ever, the Wendy's High School Heisman. And that honors high school seniors, both a male and a female, that for athletics, academics, and citizenship. And so part of all of my Eagle Scout project and stuff like that went into this. And Dave Thomas, the founder of Wendy's, was really pushing, trying to promote the youth of our country to, be recognized for doing good, right? And those are really 3 really important things for a high school senior: athletics, academics, and being involved in your community. But I didn't think that was going to push me into politics. It's just one data point, right? And so, I connected with people in a way that, I'll even mention, Jeannie Hall. She was my guidance counselor. Alan and Jeannie Hall, incredible leaders and advocates for our community. They're just amazing people. And, when I decided to run for Congress, to be able to call her and tell her I was doing it and have her be so excited. And, it's just like one of those neat things. But then you go and I took Dan Jones' poli-sci class in college, and you can't not get excited about the world of policy when you have that type of, mentorship in your life. Well, 10 years later, I ended up working alongside Dan Jones at Cicero Group, right, which is what amazing. I connected, on projects with you all.
That's right.
In my previous private sector role. So all these data points. Then I decided to get a master's in public policy while I was at Cicero Group, but I also spent time, in the diplomatic and intelligence world. I don't talk about it a lot. A lot of other people would use it as a political ploy to talk about it and everything, but these things are done under security clearance and things like that, and I honored that to the degree that I best can. But I had that experience of working within the federal government for the first half of my career. And then I went into consulting, and I look back and I think all of these crazy data points that all seemed like important, but when you put them all together and a couple of unique conversations, one person said to me, Blake, you should run for Congress because you've got an incredible background to support Hill Air Force Base. And there's 6 members of Utah's federal delegation, and only one of them has an actual job to do. Now, everybody's job is important. Don't let me understate that. But the connection between our armed services and Hill Air Force Base and northern Utah, it is proven over the last 40 years that there's a strong connection, and we need strong advocates on that. And I grew up, my deck faced the runway, and I would watch F-16s fly off of there all the time, and I recently got to get in one of them. So it's just an amazing experience. And what we have with the test and training range and Hill Air Force Base in Utah is not only a sense of pride given our veteran community and our military community, but it is strong for our economic community as well, and our manufacturing grows strong. And why are we such a great state? Why do we have such low unemployment? Because we have strong economic or manufacturing opportunities here. So all that stuff kind of culminated into, oh my goodness, I should run for Congress. I'm 39 years old. I got a young family. I don't have any political name ID whatsoever, but there was just this, I felt very strongly about it. I had a couple aspirational reasons. I want to be a strong conservative voice for the next generation. I don't want that misconstrued with media and everything, the way that people are drawn away from conservative principles. They are what have made our country so strong, and they are more inclusive than what they get credit for, and they help build everybody up economically. And I want to be that strong voice, but then advocate on a few specific issues that are really important to the 1st District.
I love it. So you've been in for a year now, just a little over a year. I know it seems like longer. Talk about your first year being in the House and some of the things that
I was joking with you. I was joking with you earlier that this January has been much better than last January. Yep. And my third day being January 6th, I'll be remiss if I didn't reflect on it. Yep. Speaker Pelosi is going to use this for every angle she can in her political world, and never let a good crisis go to waste. We need to, if it's not reform, we need to come together as members of Congress to confirm what our role is for the Electoral College Act, like what our role is on January 6th every 4 years. And I strongly believe that our role is to count the ballots, unless a state sends 2 slates of electors. And now you're seeing that process wasn't necessarily done above board, and I'd be very critical of that. Even if it comes from my party, I'll be very critical about respecting the Constitution, and not putting any individual over the Constitution is hugely important. So that was a tough experience to go through. I was in the House chamber. I made that call to my wife where I said, I don't know what's about to happen. I've never been in this situation. I made that call. Now, I think you look back on it, I don't think I was in necessarily any imminent danger, but you don't know what that's the case. And the first thing we did is we called and connected with local affiliate, just our police and our law enforcement, from what they went through that day to their response in multiple other cases, deserve our absolute respect. And we can't bring partisanship into that in any way, shape, or form. And so we need to always make sure we show our love and respect for law enforcement. And I gained a huge appreciation for them that day. And then things got, and after that settled, 2 weeks, 3 weeks later, we got on the right committees. So you kind of have a tough go at first, and then all of a sudden we get awarded. I worked really hard with leadership to show them that I want to be a serious member. I'm not there for Twitter fame or anything like that. I want to serve Utah. I want to serve the 1st District. And we pushed really hard to get on the 2 most important committees. And they're 2 committees that have been served for decades. And it wasn't easy to do it as a freshman. And we did it. And we got on it. And we've had an incredible year. And as I look back, I've seen how productive our team's been. It's tough to be productive as a freshman in the minority, in the depths of the minority, because we shouldn't have lost the Georgia Senate runoff. That's a whole nother podcast. But our party should not have lost the Georgia Senate runoff. We won it in November of 2020. We should not have lost it 6 weeks later. And when we lost that, their whole balance of power shifted in Washington. And it has been very difficult to find ways to be productive in the minority, but we have. And we've found ways to collaborate, still maintaining a very strong conservative voting record, but finding ways to do some wildfire bills, finding ways. The Medal of Honor was a bill that we passed. I'm one of only, we believe, from what we've been able to uncover, only 2 Republican freshmen have been able to sign legislation that have president sign legislation that's passed both houses of Congress. And the Medal of Honor Act is one of them. And I'll always have that, no matter what my future holds. Whenever we go to Washington, D.C., I'll take my kids. There will be a Medal of Honor monument on the National Mall, and that will be because of the work that Mark Vesey and I on the House side did. And it's a really neat experience. So we've been incredibly productive amidst a crazy, tumultuous political environment that starts with January 6th and by the commission, and now the January Select Committee that I don't support, but I supported the bipartisan one that would have been much more objective. Like it's been a crazy political environment. That's all stuff that you just have to react to, and you do it in the most objective way possible. But the work that we're actually doing is where we spend most of our time, and that's the committees that we're on. That's the debt and deficit task force that I've put together because I'm really passionate about that. And I look back and we've got a lot of productivity.
That's fantastic. What surprised you the most going into the House?
I always boil it down to two things: how little we interact with the Senate.
That's interesting.
And it's not only it is interesting because it's the biggest coming from the management consulting world where, and my previous firm.
Oh, yeah.
Collaborate, efficiency.
That's right.
Like maximize your time, all that stuff. Over like 6,000 pieces of legislation have been introduced in Washington, and only 100 of them have passed both houses of Congress. Utah will have a 45-day legislative session. They will probably introduce 1,500 pieces of legislation, and 500 of them will pass. Right. It's like 1/3 of it will that's efficiency. And some people will be like, well, wow, that's efficiency. We are dealing with, and it's because the Senate and the House don't interact with each other on enough opportunities. And that's just bad for the American people. It's a waste of time. Everybody's out there just trying to do their messaging bills. And I kind of start seeing it like, hey, I'm doing this bill. It's not going to go anywhere. It's not even going to get to a committee markup. Like, I want to put forward legislation that I can, build relationships, get something done for my district, the Saline Lakes Bill, all the stuff on Hill Air Force Base, the Bear River Heritage Study Act, like all these things that are really important to the first district that, we had an opportunity to do. And so the limited interaction with Senate, it was a surprise. We're literally 100 yards away from each other and in the same building, and there's just very little collaboration. And then how much the media distorts the reality. And that has been the most disappointing thing on the right and the left. It's really, really sad that our media, they need clickbait revenue. They are doing everything they can to sort of, rebel rouse, if you will. And they want these negative reactions, and it's not bringing our nation together. It's further driving us the wedge between us.
How is the relationship between the House and the Senate members in the Utah delegation?
Great. And we meet for breakfast breakfast.
Okay, you still do that?
Yep. Most months we make it work actually too. Sometimes we're not in session at the same time, but that relationship's great.
It is.
And everybody wants to, well, there's Mitt Romney and there's Mike Lee, and I'm like, you want to know how much they agree on things? Like a ton. Right. And just look at this voting legislation.
That's right, exactly.
There's more that we come together on than ever, of our difference of opinions. There's personality differences and all that. I look at it and I tell people, okay, right now you have an all Republican delegation, but you have got a broad perspective and a very inclusive feel from that group of 6 people that you should, you'd be able to find something with everybody that you agree on. I'll show up to a town hall and I'll start with, look, town halls are risky things to do because you're going to walk out of here and you're going to find something that you disagree with me on. And everybody here might have something that they disagree with me on. But I would urge you to focus on the majority of what we actually probably do agree on. And whether you're Democrat or Republican, you can find that. And right now we have a real opportunity. I think the Republican Party has a real opportunity to truly engage the movable middle. And I think you saw a little bit of that with Glenn Youngkin in the Virginia race. To be like, I want to be an aspirational, inclusive, bring people in and have a strong vision for America. And I think we have that opportunity right now, given it was tough being, in one party control over the last year. But I think people are seeing like, oh, that economic policy that leads directly to inflation. You spend that much money, you get inflation. That's a tax on the middle class and poor communities of our country. We cannot have signs of weakness in our military, in our defense approach, because that just leads to more and more problems. If we have an Afghanistan, Putin's emboldened. If Putin goes through with this Ukraine business in these coming days and weeks, what China's just watching, and they're looking at Taiwan and saying, well, now's the time to do some type of provocation. Like, we have to have strength. And I think that, parents with kids in school, they want, thoughtful, smart approach. This pandemic has been miserable for everybody, but we've got to have our kids back, got to have our kids in school, and we've got to have our economy continuing to move forward
taking whatever precautions we need to, but we can't shut things down. And when they see that from Democrat leadership, I think they can come back and be like, all right, conservative principles, they're what they are. They're not what the news media says they are. And I would love to support, and I would love that there's members of Congress, and I hope I could be viewed as somebody like that.
I want to spend most of our time talking about your service in the House Armed Services Committee. But before we do, could you talk just briefly about your work in the Natural Resources Committee?
Yeah, I'll be brief.
Yeah.
And I'm proud of it because we are number
great.
2. We're the second leading Republican in that committee right now that's passed legislation through committee. That means I've had a collaborative approach. That means I've found ways to work with the majority and Democrats on behalf of the things in Utah. I mentioned a couple of them, but the Saline Lakes Bill is one of the things that I'm really, really proud of because you're seeing the state legislature really concerned about the Great Salt Lake right now for all the reasons they should be worried about it. Dust buildup, environmental concerns. You put, snowpack, not only snowpack, but lake effect snow, mineral deposits, industry, tourism, everything that gets associated with that, hunting, all that. If that lake continues to decline, we got major problems ahead, respiratory issues for our residents and things like that. And they're focused on it. And we did something at the federal level. And so Senator Romney and I, he's running it in the Senate, and I'm running it in the House. We got it through committee. It's going to be a study for Saline Lakes Bill. And I had to work directly with very liberal members of the party, or of the Democrat Party, and of the committee, because they have terminal lakes in their districts. And we came together and we found a really good compromise to be able to make it work, that they were comfortable, we're comfortable, and we got it through. And that's the kind of stuff we've been able to do. We've got a lot of recreation bills. Recreation red tape, MAP Land Act, that's going to improve public land use and improve recreation on those public lands. And it's a really, really productive time and can advance. I'm on the Energy, Climate, and Conservation Task Force that the leader McCarthy put together. And right now, I think you're seeing really good solutions coming with respect to the environment, with respect to climate change. The Republicans are, here's what we've done in the past, here's what's worked well, and here's the map towards 2050 on what we can actually do. And it's a good way. We just need to get in the majority to be able to implement some of these policies, because they're not as sensationalized as what you'll see from my Democrat colleagues. And I think they are a much better balance on making sure our economy and our environment can both move in the right direction. And so we've had a successful time on natural resources, and it's really unique, special things to the state. One more thing I'll plug is John Curtis has a bill. It's the Bonneville Shoreline Trail, and it's swapping out a couple pieces of wilderness with other areas. So it's a 1-to-1 swap, but it's going to make that whole shoreline trail contiguous, so you can put a bike trail across the whole place.
It's my backyard.
And it's going to be so awesome.
I didn't know he was doing that.
Yeah. And so there's a spot up in Cache Valley. There's another area that they're going to, because you can't take anything can't take a bicycle on a piece of any wilderness property. They're going to move that, allow for it there, and then it just passed unanimous consent. And we were able to speak on behalf for them during the committee markup. So a lot of good stuff in the Natural Resources Committee.
We focused a lot over the last 3 months, 90 days, on the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. We did all of the analysis starting in July. We followed it through committees and October.
For many months, the only word ever mentioned was infrastructure.
So with your role on both committees, but especially on natural resources, do you see that some of this, we're looking at where the $1.3 trillion is being pushed into which agencies? There's a lot of money going into water. Are we going to be able to pull some of that water funding out of IIJA into some of your work here in the state, especially with the Great Salt Lake?
Yep, you hit it right on. What you're seeing mostly right now is water projects. And just with respect to the infrastructure bill in general, this was a fascinating thing to watch, to see the way leadership can cajole their members. And I'm speaking particularly on the Democrat side. Their Build Back Better plan in the House doesn't pass unless they got all the support they needed for the $1.2 trillion. The Senate, it was different. The Senate, it worked the way that, Americans would hope that it worked. And you've got a group of bipartisan 19 senators. I mean, 19 out of 50, that's a significant portion of it. But this was a, how do I say it? When Mitch McConnell lost the majority in the Senate because of that Georgia runoff, all of a sudden the Democrats said, we've got to be able to spend as much as possible in a 2-year span. And the negative side effect was what they did with infrastructure, and they were using that to get as much of the other projects done as possible. Now, ultimately, Manchin was able to say, I appreciated the infrastructure bill, and that gave me enough confidence to back off of all this other spending. But I mean, we're suffering the worst inflation we've seen in decades because of the American Rescue Plan, and that just added a ton of money to the market. So you're seeing a spending spree going on. That's the hesitation. If you had, imagine this, if you had, say, Biden in the White House, and you had Mitch McConnell over the Senate, and Pelosi with like a 4-seat majority, which she has right now, all of a sudden you've got the world's best infrastructure bill you've ever seen. And that's basically all we would have done this last year. We wouldn't have been proposing, not we, because I didn't support any of the crazy spending, but we wouldn't have had $5-6 trillion worth of proposals from the Democrat Party because they couldn't have done it because they couldn't have got it through the Senate. What we would have had over the last year was an awesome infrastructure bill. And this bill was good. No Republican ever said it was perfect, but they felt like the senators particularly felt like we've got to come up with a compromise. And ultimately, Manchin was able to back off all the other crazy spending. It's a little too late because we needed to do that during the American Rescue Plan too. There is just vast funds that aren't even being used that have flooded the market, and way too much money's gone after too few goods, and we're experiencing some crazy inflation. So I would have loved to have been in a more balanced government to get a really solid infrastructure bill. But what we ultimately have, and with Build Back Better, hopefully continuing to limp along and potentially, not be introduced, even if they cut it up, I hope not much of it gets passed. You've got a good deal here. Of the 1.2, 600 billion of it was obligated anyway. So efforts to say that not much of it was over what's core infrastructure, that's just disingenuous. That's not the case. There is more than about half of it was going to core infrastructure. An additional 100 to 200 billion was also going to supplement that. And then you have all the other buckets, and Utah will benefit from some of the water infrastructure projects. I have concerns of a couple things. I don't like to get out ahead of private investment, and when we do that as a government, we end up with another Solyndra. And I don't think that charging stations are the best solution. There's a group at Utah State that has got a really good option on electrifying the grid a little bit and charging where we don't have to have such big batteries, because the size of batteries is only going to become more wear and tear, more waste. If we can reduce the size of batteries by building better infrastructure in there, in the roads and everything, then there's some really cool technology that's coming out of our district up here in Utah State. So yeah, you're going to see it go to a smattering of different things. And what I think you'll also see is where our office has been approached, is there infrastructure funding for XYZ? And my legislative director is just taking that in and saying, we'll flush it out, because there's going to be a process to go through on where that all comes. Water infrastructure is needed. This is, of all the things that are getting passed and proposed right now, the infrastructure bill should have, and in small other circumstances would have had much more bipartisan support if Pelosi hadn't played so many games with it towards the final stretches there. And we should ultimately benefit from this. Won't be as much inflationary spending as some of the other projects we've had. But I know we can do some good water projects. Municipalities are coming to us with good requests that would be good, strong, forward-thinking pieces that we would love to get involved with.
What we found is that a lot of these state entities and municipalities, especially, that are trying to capture some of this funding for specific projects, they don't have the bandwidth to do this. They don't have resources. So we're going into state agencies, municipalities, nonprofits, and setting up these command centers to build a capture strategy, a capture plan, and then work all of the proposals. I don't know if you're watching what's happening as this funding's being pushed to the agencies, but a lot of the agencies are requiring these organizations, government organizations, to respond to an RFP. They're then granting the funding to the state entity or municipal entity, and then the state entity is then RFPing their that out to the private sector. So we're working with a lot of these entities across the U.S., helping to capture the funding for a region, whether it's interstate, state, municipality, or county, capture the funding and then helping them RFP this and then work with the private sector to fulfill whatever the project is. And it's an interesting process. I've never seen anything like this in my.
Is it going to add more bureaucracy, or is it going to give a little bit of more local control and local decision making?
Well, we've been doing this for some time now with the Build Back Better, initial Build Back Better RFPs and awards. We were a part of a lot of those strategies, the proposal, and now execution on phase 1 and phase 2. I think a lot of agencies, the Department of Transportation, Commerce, EPA, DOD, learned a lot through that first round. Because remember, we're not working subject to the federal acquisition regulations. They're grants. These are grant dollars.
ARPA or from American Rescue Plan that passed in
That's right. And
that's what I've mostly talked to mayors about when they're saying they have ARPA funds, that they're like, we didn't ask for it, but we're trying to do the smartest thing because we know it's not going to ever, the spigot's going to get cut off at some point from the federal government. Where we're just trying to build good projects going forward, which I'm supportive of. I'm like, you got the money. I don't necessarily approve of how it all played out. It was hyper-partisan, but what are you going to do with it? What are you going to do when you think 20 years in advance?
And I think the key element of this legislation that organizations are not focused on is the jobs piece of this. And we're looking at the infrastructure and the funding and whatnot, but how are we building jobs, especially for individuals like veterans and TANF eligible and whatnot? And so our team is really working closely with organizations as these projects start to push these demographics that it's difficult, that have difficulty in finding and keeping jobs. So we've been very focused on that. So let's shift to your role in the House Armed Services Committee. For the last 50 years, LSI has worked closely with the Utah delegation and both the House and Senate Armed Services Committees on a number of DoD projects, including multiple rounds of BRAC, workload.
We don't mention that term. All right, it's like talking to like a no-hitter during a no-hitter.
It's been a long time, and I do have some questions about that. But 50 years, LSI has worked closely with the House and Senate Armed Services Committee, with a lot of your predecessors, including Jim Hansen, who we work closely with, and then Rob Bishop, and now privileged to work with you. Talk about your work in the Armed Services Committee. What do you see? What are you anticipating in the next year? What's going to happen in terms of the focus and appropriations tied to DoD?
I spoke to a group of students today at Da Vinci Academy down in Grand Avenue, downtown, and asked me, they said, how much of your time is spent on local issues versus national issues? And it was a great question.
That is a great question.
I've never really timed it out. And I thought, well, let me give you an example, because this is like marble cake federalism. I basically view it as marble cake on things that I'm involved with, because our main priorities on the Armed Services Committee relate to Hill Air Force Base, but they're big national defense issues. GBSD program, nuclear proliferation, nuclear deterrence,
advanced sustainment,
F-35, right. Making sure that we're the operational wing of the F-35, making sure that has what it needs to, everything has hiccups along the way, and we need to make sure that is the premier, fighter for the next generation. Workforce issues.
Huge.
With respect to when a veteran, so they retire from the active duty, how quickly can they use their skills, still supporting the defense mission, and then depot modernization. So all of those things are key to what we're doing, and they're very, very important to the local community. But overall, that's what handles our readiness. That's what handles our ultimate protection, and they're essential to our national security. So it's a nice mixture of what we're doing. Like all those things that I just mentioned are some of our big priorities. What we need to do to be the forward-thinking type of committee, we've got to break the chain of what we're seeing right now in hanging on or doing too much sustainment of an antiquated or old weapon system and not embracing enough of the future. So I had to ask this question before even being put on the committee, and I was nervous to ask it because there was people there that were much more versed in this than me. But I asked the question, I said, what ratio are we needing to deal with existing systems and embracing new technology? And the General Keane said, well, if you can solve that, you just solve the DoD's problem going forward in the next 5 to 10 years. Because we're at a crucial point right now. We're leaving a lot of the conflict in the Middle East. We're fighting a new battle with China, and it's going to be in cyber warfare, and it's going to be in AI, and it's going to be a whole different ball game. And if we, as the superpower, can't make the adjustments while in the lead, we're going to allow that individual, that country that's drafting off of us, that's just like, oh, if they develop this, we'll counter it with a much cheaper option. And that's the kind of stuff that's going to take place. And so we need to be thinking about how to embrace that. And I think there's some very pragmatic ways to go about doing this. What is every politician worried about? Re-election, right? Let's just be real.
Every 2 years.
Every 2 years, every politician is worried about re-election. What's one of the main things that helps politicians get reelected? If they have strong jobs in their districts. So losing jobs because of a program that probably should be retired, it's really tough for members of Congress to grapple with that. So we should make a standard or a system and put it in place that if that happens to your district, you have first crack at replacing it with what that new technology, that new thing needs to be. And I'd go up against anybody. Hill Air Force Base, I mean, we already are that model of, we've got a lot of existing weapon systems, and we can sift through that and find out what's important, what's not. But I mean, we're embracing, GBSD, F-35, but all the swag, the software type of stuff we're doing, it's huge, and we're doing it so well. So we have a good diverse mix of what's going on at Hill Air Force Base, and we need to be willing to double down on those efforts. What's going to be important going forward, and we know what they are. We know what the emerging threat is, and we just need to be willing to go out and embrace that.
You mentioned GBSD. This is a program that we have been working since the inception of the company, and we started with the early Minuteman program and have supported the Air Force and its contractors over the years, and then GBSD. What do you see as the future of GBSD? It's an expensive weapon. I think it's long overdue. As you had mentioned, the sustainment of Minuteman it's not reasonable. We need a new system. What is the House looking at in terms of GBSD over the next 20, 25 years?
Yeah, so we, first year, baby steps, had it listed as our number one priority into the chairman's mark, and we received full funding for this budget.
It's amazing.
You see some dissent among the Democrats in the committee, trying to communicate that there only needs to be 2 legs of the nuclear triad. It's very important to remind them that this was President Barack Obama's plan. And they have to then eat their words and be like, oh, yeah, I know. Well, I think he was wrong, too. Like, there's a few members, and I've gone out of my way to go and embrace and engage with them and understand where their issues are and understands where their concerns are, because that's where you find the root of it. Sustaining, and their options are continuing to sustain the Minuteman program. The cost associated with that and the inability to do that because parts just aren't there anymore. This was a program that was designed to be in play for 10 years, and we're approaching 50. It is literally like my furnace.
Now, it wasn't designed to go as long as it has. The old codger's still kicking. My HVAC guy came over and was like, two things. They're both 20, 30 years older than they need to be. But don't change them until this one starts leaking, and that's our water heater. And it did. It started leaking a year ago. I'm like, just like you said it was going to. Leak. Then we went and bought a new one. Like, if I were to be smart, I would take that furnace and I would update it now and quit wasting all the extra waste that I'm doing every single year. And I would embrace and modernize it. And ultimately, it would be more efficient. It would be better heat the home, better cool the home. We have a million other positive externalities that come from it. And if you look 10, 15 years down the road, it would be cheaper. And that's what GBSD is. If you embrace the modernization of GBSD program, it will actually be cheaper than continuing on with this antiquated system. And this is the part. You answer these two questions. One, has the ground-based strategic deterrent, Minuteman or the new GBSD, has nuclear deterrence kept us, our nation and the world, out of major global conflict? There is no way, and any sane person would say it absolutely has. And then the second question is, has it saved countless lives? And it absolutely has. And if the answer to those two things are yes, then you have to embrace nuclear deterrence. And our version, ground-based, it's actually more affordable. It's easier to manage, and we're right ready to go than the other two options. And so this is a great solution. It's been an awesome solution, and moving forward with it is something that we're and our team very supportive of, and something that we're building a lot of support, even among those sort of dissenting voices, and we'll be able to continue to communicate the benefits.
I appreciate all your support over the last year on the work at Hill Air Force Base, and I'm privileged to be a part of this. Last month, I visited a Air Force base that has a large workforce that is engineering, software, program management. And as I went through this base, there was nobody there. Everybody was working remotely. What happened in the over COVID, over the last 2 years, is we pushed everybody to work from home.
Yeah.
And what a lot of these bases found was, this might be more effective, more efficient. You mentioned SWAG at Hill Air Force Base, that the leadership there, I've got a very close relationship with that team, and they found that sending their team home, they actually improved their throughput and productivity.
Really? I think you saw it in the private sector too. So continue on.
We did. Do you anticipate, here's where I'm going with this. As I walked through this base, and it was a ghost town, and it's a large base. It's an important base. And I was thinking all of this work could come to Utah.
Yeah.
They had given me these briefings about workforce, about they're not able to recruit and retain scientists and software engineers and mechanical, electrical engineers. We could bring a lot of that workload here. We were teasing about BRAC. Is the House looking at any kind of, even if it's not a full-on BRAC, are they looking at a realignment, especially where you've got federal buildings that are empty and it's hard to bring them into these locations?
So in response, two big things that I'm thinking of in response to this. One, no, we haven't been thinking about it. I think the pandemic is still too fresh and ongoing to make any major decisions about where that would. I'm sure that individuals in that district and that base wouldn't want to lose those jobs for that general area. But we will. This is a Clayton Christensen type of disruption. And if the federal government, if the military isn't willing to embrace it, then they're going to get left behind by the continual issues of tech sector jobs stealing, good, solid talent. The concept of mission and country and service can only go so far as to keeping and retaining good talent within the DoD. So if we're not willing to embrace some of the
Let's be honest. We've all enjoyed a little less commute sometimes. I like committee hearings have been more on virtual. Like I've gotten 2-3x done more just because I can do remote commercial. So I think every level from private to nonprofit to public sector jobs needs to have a real awakening with this disruption that COVID's done. It's okay to embrace technology. It's okay to embrace a remote workforce. And like you said, you are seeing some efficiency come from it. And I think some of that will happen naturally. We have to be willing to go to where the DoD can do its job in the best case possible. And if that means collaborating more software engineers here in northern Utah, I will be the first one to advocate for that. And there's a real opportunity, and what you do well you should be able to double down and expand it more. It is nice to have good, solid DoD workforce across the country. It's good for representatives of Congress, Democrat and Republican alike, to represent some of these areas. It builds overall involvement and trust. With that, the armed services is like one of the last bastions of bipartisanship on the Hill right now.
It is.
You still see a lot of bills passed by voice vote and through suspension, and you're going to have far more bills that are done not on party lines than not. You only hear about the ones that get done on party lines, but we need to make sure to embrace it. So I think we're still a couple years out from figuring out what that realignment could potentially look like. We just have to be willing to do what's best and maintaining SCIFs. Maintaining security. You can't do all this work can't be done in your basement. Okay. So there's that. The second aspect to that, you didn't bring it up, but it is the biggest opportunity that I think we have is we're sitting right now in a federal building. It is dead empty. There are bases all over the country that have huge swaths of land. 3 words, enhanced use lease. And why not build our communities and let our communities come in with private sector investment? Let the Air Force, let the military relinquish some of that land, lease it out. It's a win. It's a triple win, right? Everybody wins in these situations. It's wasted land. It's stuff they're not doing anything productive with right now. They don't want to give up the opportunity, but if they can give it and use it for a local community to benefit from, like Falcon Hill, we need to build better housing opportunities for airmen, all that stuff. That's a huge push that in one breath, I don't want to tell everybody about it because we do so well. We
pioneered it
here at Hill Air Force Base, and I kind of I don't want the best kept secret to get out too much, but I want the DoD to benefit, and we need to embrace it across the country. And I talk to my colleagues about it. I tell them anytime you need a good case study of enhanced use lease and how it can work out, come talk to our team. We've got a really good model there, and I think that the opportunity is there on this disruption going on with COVID than it even is on remote workforce.
I love that idea. I was really excited to work the EUL concept, and we put together a lot of the policy work around this, and to see it now nearly 20 years later and what's happened, it is the model for EULs around the world. So, Congressman Moore, I really appreciate you spending this time with us this afternoon. I appreciate all the things you're doing. You touch so much of what we do in our company, and especially since you've been there over the last year, your work with GBSD and Minuteman Sustainment, F-35, IIJA, the EUL. I really appreciated your work and help with the Military Spouse Initiative, the Transitioning Veteran Jobs Initiative, and what you're doing to support Hill Air Force Base in general. It's amazing.
And I actually spoke to this group of students today about there is no reason that a spouse that is moving with a military reason, that's moving from Georgia to Utah, his or her certification in veterinary science or nursing or anything teaching shouldn't be immediately accepted with the new base that they're at. Like that to me is just like, you mean that hadn't been the case since in here? What the heck's been going on back here, folks? Like coming from a consulting world to the federal government, I knew it was going to be tough, but some of these things are like, are you kidding me? Like we're putting our military families through so much. We move them around so much. It causes an enormous strain. Let's ease their burden a little bit for crying out loud. And we could probably save some costs for crying. It's fun. I love it. We'll fix all these problems over time.
When we opened, you talked about your admiration for Dan Jones and then your opportunity to work with him. I had a similar experience with Ted Wilson, and who I really admired, and he taught me a lot. And while I was in Ted Wilson's class at the University of Utah, he said what was going on during that quarter was Tiananmen Square in China, and the Berlin Wall had just come down. And I remember him saying to me, you're living in history right now. This is history that you read about. You're living through that. Do you feel that way in your service in the House? I mean, look what you're doing, and this time of your service. It's really amazing. I mean, do you think about your mark in history, especially now?
This past year is one of the most peculiar, probably freshman years of the year. The way that it started, then experiencing Afghanistan, it has been more than noteworthy. I think you live it, you go through it, and you don't think it's much. But when I look back and I look at my life and the opportunities that I've had and the unique work environments that I've lived in, yeah, this is definitely something that I do. I take it all in. How to translate that to my kids, I'll probably have to be in like a little book or a memoir.
They're going to listen to the podcast.
They're going to listen to the podcast.
Oh my goodness, he was on a podcast. He was on the LSI podcast.
I was on Inside Politics one time, and I made him watch the short clip. And they were just like, "Can we watch something else, Dad? Is there like a cartoon on or something?" So, yeah, you go through, life becomes mundane in a lot of ways, and then you have to take a step back and be like, "Holy cow, this is the coolest thing."
Yes.
There was, and you can't let the monotony of a certain role eclipse the fact that you're walking into that Capitol Dome every single day and voting on the House floor. And it's pretty incredible. I remember going in my previous job in the intelligence world, and I would walk past the Berlin Wall every single day. Big chunk of it that was placed there. So it's a neat experience. So,
well, thank you for all you do, and I appreciate you spending this time with us. This was fantastic. So I hope you enjoyed this episode with Congressman Blake Moore. He's such a dynamic force in the U.S. House and has a lot of visibility in his role on both the House Armed Services Committee and the Natural Resources Committee. If you have an interest in capturing work with the U.S. federal government, especially the Department of Defense, if you are interested and have an interest in growing installations in your community, if you are a government entity looking to capture IIJA funding, please reach out to us and we will have somebody help you through this process and can help establish command centers and build strategies around installations and other IIJA funding. This was a fantastic episode. It was my pleasure to be with Congressman Moore on this episode.